Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Matt Palackdharry. Matt is the Chief Strategy Officer at Apty, a digital adoption platform companies can use when working to coordinate their people, processes, and technology. So, hi, Matt. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Hi, Kelly. It's a pleasure to join you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, I talked a little bit about what your job is currently and where Apty's focus is. But tell us a little bit more before we dig into the meat of today's conversation about your background or your professional journey to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. My background really is in tech entrepreneurship. I love building companies. I love all the emerging technology coming out and finding ways that we can leverage it to bring more benefits to enterprise companies. So it's been how I built my career. I started my career more in sales before I got into entrepreneurship. But then once I got into entrepreneurship, it started at a company called Vinamaya, which we rebranded as Acquire. And we turned it into one of the fastest growing marketplaces in the world. And today, if you're familiar with the Coupa marketplace, the Acquire marketplace is a portion of that. So we're tremendously proud of that technology. Then I joined a company called Tealbook up in Toronto that is focused on supplier data and helping solve that problem. And so really to this point, it's been a lot of core procurement tech problems to date. And now I'm focused on a company called Apty, which is really trying to solve learning and development challenges within enterprise organizations, and specifically as it relates to enterprise software.
Now, that background, I'm sure, is coming in useful because every problem that we face today seems to have some range of proposed digital solutions. And I think for a lot of people that are either working to implement or having the implementation happen to them, it seems like everything is changing so fast. And technology a lot of times is seen as the cause. But can technology also help us keep up with the rate of change in business today?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the part I think that gets me the most excited about what Apty can do, because when I look at my entrepreneurship journey, if I go back even 10 years ago, the types of technology that's available that's available today just didn't exist. And so a lot of times we were trying to alter existing technologies to solve certain problems. Sometimes they did really well, sometimes they didn't do really well. But today, majority of problems can be solved with some of the emerging tech concepts. The problem now, though, is that there's so many technologies. How do you learn them, right? And so I think it's been a cool evolution in space. It's not typically can we solve a problem anymore. It's can we solve the problem? Will people use the solution we put in place? Which is why I've shifted a little bit of my focus to helping people leverage the technologies they've already invested so heavily into.
Well, it's funny you talk about all the solutions, procurement. We love our spider charts, right? What are all the solutions that do all the little things? It's getting to the point that the logos are getting so small. You need like an old school magnifying glass to find anything on the page. And I guess while that might be overwhelming from a decision-making standpoint, it is exciting because it means that creativity and funding are all being drawn to the procurement space to try to attack the problems that we face in different ways. Now, the other thing that I think makes all of that possible is that procurement is a function that is never done growing, never trying to outperform whatever the last achievement was. But that requires just as much innovation and imagination as it does to be successful as an entrepreneur. When you think about being your best or achieving at your highest level, what level of imagination do you think we need to actually understand what that means and how hard we need to push ourselves?
Yeah, well, I think imagination is a core part of intelligence in general, regardless of what field you're in. And actually, I feel at this point, it's almost provable of how we have trained computers to learn the way that we have. Because before, we used to take computers and try to mimic how humans would learn. Some really interesting things have happened really over the last, say, 5 years here, especially with neural networks, is we have mastered how we learn and built that process into a computer. But now we can run so many more simulations that we can actually learn faster going in reverse. A lot of times we will run a simulation through a computer and then teach humans how the computer solved it faster. And there's some examples of this, like, for example, in chess, where leading up into 2010, the best chess players in the world, the computers were trying to learn from the chess player. Now, the best chess players in the world are figuring out all the different avenues that you can win and which moves give you the best probable simulation. And there's recently a new development in one called AlphaFold, where it does the similar thing, where using neural networks again, we were able to solve some protein folding problems that we haven't been able to solve in all of our existence studying science. And so now that we know how computers learn the best, we then can apply those concepts to ourselves so that we can figure out how we learn the best. And there's really two concepts here when you think about a neural network and you bring it down to its most simple level. The first is that you have to play both sides of the board, for lack of a better term. Each option, you have to fully argue each side of the equation. And then as you continue to go deeper and deeper into the chain, as soon as you recognize that the logic doesn't hold through, you want to deviate to the other side. And once you do that process, you're going to find advancements coming so much faster. I think procurement is really primed to do this as well, because at its core, neural networks and game theory, there's a couple of industries I think combined will disrupt them entirely. And procurement, because it's in control of so much spend, and you're constantly thinking about game theory and how even things like the geopolitical landscape will alter your strategies. Those two technologies combined make it very interesting. And I think most organizations will start to leverage technologies of both over the next several years.
Now, you mentioned neural networks and you gave the example about chess. I'm going to ask you for a favor. I'm going to ask you to back it down to checkers level. When you talk about neural networks, what does that mean, and how might it connect to some of the conversations being had more generally about AI and procurement right now?
So a neural network is a type of AI, and it's really about simulating every possibility that comes forward in a scenario. And so I like to use chess or checkers as a simple scenario because there's a limit to how many moves are available on the board, right? And we have a perfect simulator to do so. And so what a neural network would do is say, if I move my pawn forward, what is the response of this other person? And you can play all the different simulations against each other to then determine which move had the highest probability of success when you look at the results in the end. And we've done this for virtually every board game now. So a game that I used to play as a kid in Monopoly, there have been simulators that have built, and now I can play Monopoly and I know how to win every time, and it's to buy the oranges. And we find out these things, and strategy from neural networks reversed helps us act in a way that you're constantly doing the thing that is not what intuitively feels right, but from a probability standpoint is right. Now, I've mentioned some games where the simulations are pretty easy, where you only have a couple of choices. And I think that's where, when we get into the real world, there's some challenges. For example, there are no simulators that will predict, things like COVID arising, or, as the geopolitical landscape changes, or what actions will be taken in certain of the global conflicts that are going on. We can do our best to do those things and then come up with the decisions that every person might play. But a neural network will always be restricted by the possibility of its simulations. I think that's the part that I think all the listeners can feel really good, that AI is not going to fully replace humans, and especially in these strategic roles. It's that you have now an additional tool at your disposal where you can run these simulations, you can see the probable outcomes, and you can make your decisions accordingly. But there's always going to be some variance in between what the simulator predicts and what actual options are available. And actually, that's why humans will always be in control of the neural network, not the other way.
And yet, one of the things I have to think that we can benefit from is the speed at which all of these different scenarios can be run. So let's say you've taken as much information as you can reasonably gather. You've sort of figured out what the scenarios are. You've let the computer chew on it and give some recommendations. And then there's some kind of black swan event, right? It could be COVID. It could be a very surprising election someplace in the world, or even a regulatory change. At least that gives procurement the option to say, okay, something we completely didn't expect and couldn't predict, but then we can plug all of that new information back in. And I'm assuming rerun the scenarios to sort of get an updated round of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we build better and better simulators there, hopefully we have some foresight that some of these events could occur. But I think this is where, say, for example, a risk management solution is so important, because now you're going through the different likelihood of events. And then you do even some of your disaster planning, right? So your business continuity plans. What happens if an election somewhere gets lost and new tariffs get put in place, and you just invested in a huge manufacturing plant because it was cheaper at the time, but now you're paying taxes every time it comes into your core markets? Those things are very realistic in today's world, and in maybe a way it wasn't super realistic 10 years ago. And so all of these decisions we made could have been right at the time, and with a certain level of additional appropriated risk, they may not be the right decision, or they could still be the right decision, but you need to have a backup plan in place.
Yeah.
AI is a really great way to help monitor those additional scenarios and make sure that you're always positioned in a way that you can put the company in the best position possible.
Well, and it's interesting because I think about how we used to run even sourcing optimization scenarios back in the day. I'll be honest, I was using Excel. there were times that we would use platforms as well, but let's face it, there was a lot of optimization going on in Excel. It's interesting because I imagine the AI is largely indifferent. So maybe it comes back and it says, here's 5 possible viable solutions or paths forward. Each one comes with relative benefits, relative costs. It's really for procurement sitting down with the business to say, okay, maybe this one is literally less expensive, but maybe there's some negative impact to customer experience, or maybe it's going to require us to put risk or hardship onto a supplier. At least so far, that seems to be the piece, which is the most valuable piece, where the people get to sit down around the table and look at the results that AI has presented, granted, based on our inputs, and say, okay, no option is ever going to be perfect, and it's not going to be forever. But based on the scenario we're in today and the likely changes that maybe we are anticipating on the horizon, this is the decision we're going to make. It maybe will hopefully let us focus on that type of effort a little bit more instead of the number crunching in Excel.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, because one of the things I tell our teams often, in a slightly different manner, is that when people make decisions, they make their decisions in one of 3 categories, and this all comes from Aristotle and his foundation of rhetoric. But people will either make decisions in a logos way, which means logic, and so just, does this supplier make the most logical sense to choose? Then they'll make a decision in a pathos way, which is an emotional way. Maybe you believe in some of their causes that they have on their website. Maybe they are in your city and keeping the dollars in your city. There's some other emotional reason that you may want to do business with this provider. And then there's an ethos way, which is typically, if you don't know a ton about the business, then you will go with a supplier that has the most trust behind their name. Hey, this provider is always in the upper right of the Gartner Magic Quadrant. I don't need to do my extra research. There are teams of people that have done this, right? So there are 3 different ways that you can make your decision. And when you think about AI is going to be very great at helping you with logos decisions. So if you're trying to determine, hey, which logically makes the most sense for the business, these AI or neural networks specifically, they'll help you with that. What they won't help you with, and they're really not that great at, are the other 2, right? They'll tell you how people grade, but you can do that research on yourself just as easily. And then two, the emotional component, you're going to know what impacts you from an emotional level, or what causes you want to support, or what causes even your business wants to support much better than, say, AI can. And so I think that we just continue to frame where AI can be very helpful in our decision making. Where should we use AI to complement what we're doing? And then where do we need the human intuition still to help make sure that we're building a business that we're all proud of?
And I think it's so interesting because we get to look at it from that perspective of keeping it human. So on the one hand, we can talk about AI, artificial intelligence. On the other hand, to your point, we can talk about AI, Aristotle intelligence. But really, at the end of the day, it's almost about being able to acknowledge that. Because I think going back to the earliest days of procurement, there have always been cases, this is actually true, where no, we did not make a decision based on picking the lowest cost provider. And so once you depart from that point, it's understanding what's going to be best for the customer base or brand value or community bonds, as you've talked about. And maybe being able to bring some of that into the conversation opens the door to having higher level, more enlightened even conversations with the business, because we're calling out and saying, okay, if we're going to make a pure logical decision, this is the straightforward option. But if we have these other options on the table, what are the other things that we can trade a little bit of money for, but get a whole lot of benefit out? I think that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Absolutely. And I expect that that's going to be one of the biggest dilemmas and interesting pieces to look at in procurement over the next couple of years is how do you leverage some of the AI tool sets that are coming out? How do you get to more data-driven decisions while also not forgetting that human component? And at the end of the day, one of the reasons procurement can be so powerful is the amount of dollars that it controls. Yeah. And by just the movement of those dollars, who you're supporting, how they spend the money, how are their employees paid, who gets the benefit of the taxes that are spent there. Those are all considerations that we need to have in procurement. And I think those are more the fun things personally than, like early in my career, it was all, how do we get to the lowest price possible? And there's certainly value in that to some level, but at some point you hit the peak of value that can be derived there, and all the other value comes from those more pathos driven levers.
Now, we've talked a ton about people, and we've talked a ton about tech and digital capabilities, but that third leg of the stool is process. How can we make sure that we're not allowing ourselves to be too dazzled by the new AI capabilities, or not trying to overcompensate too much by saying, no, humans still have value to give, that we neglect process? How can we make sure that those technology investments and investments in people and skills and talent support business processes as they should be, and that those processes continue to keep up with what the business as a whole needs?
Yeah. Well, this is definitely a question that's near and dear to my heart, and one thing that we're trying to build at Apty. So I'm going to be biased in this answer here, but it's one of those things that we talk about all the time over here. And it's really because technology, and as a technologist myself, when you first set out to build technology, you try to think of how many people can benefit from a certain way that you build a platform. And you try to be as broad as you can there while still providing a level of depth of the solution that people can actually get the value out of. But the real value comes when you start catering it to your business, right? And this is one of the reasons that so many implementations have custom implementations when we install procurement tech, because we need them to follow our business processes. And there's nuances in every business that we need to be aware of and make sure that those are captured in the processes and that people follow them. And I think that when you think about adoption of technology, the processes part of it is probably the most difficult, because in some businesses, the thresholds are all different. In some businesses, the approval chains are all different. In one business, a screw in a desk could be categorized as indirect and non-strategic. And then in another, that same screw could be bolting your airplane wing together. And then all of a sudden it's one of the most strategic things you can do. And I think what we need to do is leverage some of the technology. So I think this is an area that the large language models can really benefit us, because we spend all this time in documentation and policies and procedures, but we don't make those easy to consume, right? There's hundreds of pages, and let's be honest, nobody's ever read those. And
not even in some cases the people who wrote them.
Right. And so now, at least in a question answer format, this is just in general how humans learn. You need to ask a question and be shown the answer in the context of your processes. And that's what we try to do. So now at any time, if you pull up in our chat bot, we've consumed all of your policies and your procedures. You can then ask a question, and then it will show you on screen how to do the task that you wanted, but do it in line with the processes and procedures that the organization wants. And when you do both of those things, you use the platform, and then you do it in such a way that it follows the processes and procedures that the organization wants you to do. That's how you then start capturing the value that you bought the software for in the initial point. And oftentimes we'll step into implementations where, hey, the implementation went great. We spent all the time building the policies and procedures. People use the platform, but they're using it for ways that are non-compliant. And, they think they're doing a benefit, but they're actually hurting because they don't understand all the downstream effects. And this is where digital adoption, I think, can be so important. And just learning in general is embedding the learning into the processes of day-to-day life, because I fundamentally believe that as humans, we learn through trial and error or asking questions versus sitting and reading 50-page documentation, right? So.
Now, speaking of asking questions in order to learn things, we have a tradition here at the Sourcing Hero podcast. It's something that every listener looks forward to in each episode. Matt, I'm going to give you 2 questions.
Okay.
You can choose either one, and I promise I haven't heard a wrong answer yet.
Okay.
So here are your options. Either what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you, or what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
Well, I'm gonna take the sourcing hero one, just because I've spent a lot of time in this particular question over the years. And to me, a sourcing hero is somebody who puts the business first and really becomes an invaluable partner to the business. And I'll use a marketing example here, right? And I consider myself a bit of a marketer myself, where, sometimes I'll get a vision of using a specific vendor, and it's hard to get me to come off that vendor. I've bought into their vision. They may be more expensive. In some cases, they may be much more expensive. In some cases, I know I haven't done my due diligence, but I bought into their vision. And instead of just coming back with the cheapest option, which I think in some cases procurement can do, and that wouldn't be the hero model. A true hero model and a great partner there is somebody that comes back and truly heard why I like that preferred vendor so much, then goes out and finds somebody who can deliver the same level of quality and then save on the P&L, and then allow me to do so many more other things with my marketing budget because you helped me there. And I think that's sometimes what gets lost is we're trying to race to the bottom and choose the lowest cost vendor, when it's really about who can deliver the highest quality at a fair price. And oftentimes the highest quality comes with a premium price tag attached. And it is a whole lot of work to find the high quality vendor at the fair price. But they exist, and procurement, especially the really great sourcing heroes that I've worked with, they do a phenomenal job at finding those, the ones that have an unbelievable product at a fair price.
I think that's a great point. Even remembering my days as a practitioner, we get so focused on capturing the what that somebody wants to buy that it's very easy to overlook and forget to dig into the why they want it. So I think that's a terrific opportunity for heroism to call out. Now, Matt, if people have met you for the first time listening to or watching this episode, where would be a good way for them to get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I would say either LinkedIn. So my name is on the screen here. It's Matt Palackdharry. You can also use my email, which is matt.palackdharry@apty.io. And then we have invested a lot into our website as well. So if you just want to scrounge around and see what we're about, our web address is www.apty.io.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much for being with me today. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.